Hi everyone, so I hope everyone's comfy. My name is Hadina and this is Muzaina and we're from Lokalfeed. So we are super excited to introduce to you to these amazing panelists who have agreed to do this with us. So also I'd like to thank all of you for watching and sitting in with us on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. So Nicole will be the moderator for today. Just a few house rules. Yeah, just a few house rules before we start on this discussion. First of all, this will be recorded, and secondly, this is a safe space, so maybe ask that all viewers respect this space, and we're all here for you. So, and last but not least, please feel free to drop your questions anytime during the discussion, and if we have time in the end, our panelists may answer them. So yeah, now I'll just pass the mic over to Nicole. Yeah.
Hi everyone, thanks Hadina and Moose. I think we'll just start off with a quick introduction first. Everybody on the panel, very glad for all of us to be here together. I think all of us represent and stand up for something that's really important and much needed in terms of like discussion in our society today. So yeah, I think we'll start off with a quick introduction first. I will begin and then I think we can go one round before we start on today's agenda. So everybody, my name is Nicole. I host and produce a podcast called Something Private. We are published under local media publisher Our Grandfather's Story, and we're quite similar to Lokalfeed in terms of like the topics that we cover and like what we stand for. We typically talk about issues related to health and wellness, as well as gender and societal issues. So we have done a couple of episodes on like sexual assault and harassment, as well as talking to lawyers about what kind of legal rights victims and survivors can get if they find themselves in that situation. So very pleased to be on this panel today. Nice to meet all of you. So just getting the ball rolling. Maybe we can go with Danny next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Danny. I am a lawyer based in Singapore. I've grown up in Singapore, been here my whole life pretty much, although you wouldn't know it from the accent. So I moved into this space after a few years of practice where I started experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace. And we'll get into this in more detail later, but that is what made me start to speak out. I became involved in the Aim for Zero campaign with Aware, and I've been a spokesperson for that, and up until the end of the campaign at the end of last year. And so that was a 2-year campaign. We pressed for zero tolerance of sexual violence. There were 9 other survivors who were on this journey with me. We made lots of videos and spoke out and did quite a lot of raising awareness as much as we could. I worked alongside the writers of This Is What Happens to Pretty Girls, the Pandemonium production. And since then, I've really just been working as an advocate for sexual violence survivors and also speaking out on issues of mental health.
Cool, nice to have you on the panel, Danny. Maybe you can go with Suli next.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Suli and I am a full-time musician. I teach, I perform, and I also run a music education platform called The Music Connection. And on the side, I co-founded So Let Us Talk, which is a support group for sexual assault and domestic violence women survivors. So I started as a participant with Aware in their support group, and I found that it was very helpful in my journey as a survivor. And then on, I actually did a couple of runs with them as a facilitator myself. And just last year, in May 2020, we decided to take this independently with So Let Us Talk.
Thank you, Suli. And last but not least, we have Dawn.
Hi everyone, I'm Dawn. I'm currently studying my master's in art therapy at LaSalle, and I co-founded Girl Talk, which is a campaign that aims to help women on campus situations respond to sexual harassment. I'm also involved in a lot of philanthropy and like mental health as I try to incorporate it with my artistic practice. So I'm an artist and I do painting and pottery, but I also use art in order to engage vulnerable communities. For example, extra offenders from New Caris Mission, children with cleft lip surgeries in Vietnam Outreach, and the Asian Women Welfare Association. So right now I'm doing a placement at Project X where we aim to help and empower sex workers, both in terms of like legal aspects and also in terms of their social and sexual well-being. Thank you.
Cool. I just wanted to say it's an honor being alongside the three of you today. All of you come from very interesting and amazing backgrounds. So I think for everybody tuning in, very excited to hear what the rest of the afternoon is going to be like in terms of the experiences you guys bring working with like victims and survivors. I think just to get the conversation rolling, I think I will go through what the panel agenda is for today. So the panel is titled Breaking the Silence on Sexual Misconduct. And I think the reason why Lokalfeed wanted to spotlight this in particular is because I think cases of sexual misconduct and harassment has been put under the spotlight in the past year. There's been a rise of cases being reported in like tertiary schools, at workplaces, and a lot of women, even like I would say like us on the panel, we've used our social media presence and our digital space to kind of speak up on the issue. So I think this is really a panel for us to come together to discuss the emotional and physical boundaries, understanding terms like consent, respect, and providing support to those who have broken their silence. So I think to start off the conversation, let's begin by kind of breaking down the definition of sexual misconduct and the different forms of sexual misconduct. Yep. So I think you guys can feel free to answer it according to who sees fit, I guess.
I'm happy to jump in on this first, and then maybe other people can add on. So for me, I think in a more generalized definition, sexual harassment specifically is offensive, unwanted, or unwelcome behavior of a sexual nature. And then we have a slightly different, but it could encompass this as well, sexual abuse, which is unwanted sexual activity, which may or may not involve force, and it usually does not involve consent. And then, of course, we have sexual aggression, which is using coercion up to a point, including rape. There are lots of different categories of this, and this can be demonstrated by both men and women, although of course the things that we most commonly see in the media and things that are most commonly reported are incidents against women.
Thank you, Danny. Would anybody else like to chime in with their own understanding of what sexual misconduct is?
I think I can also add on to that. Many times when I speak with survivors, they often ask me, like, did what happened? Is it considered as sexual harassment? Did I actually get harassed? And a lot of the times I'll tell them, well, as long as the perpetrator made you feel uncomfortable or violated or offended, I think that is a cue to say that your boundaries have been broken and violated. And I think that a lot of the times, while we are thinking about this idea of what sexual harassment is, just this feeling of being uncomfortable is often enough to indicate that you can do something about it, or you can speak about whether you're uncomfortable and respond to it. So I guess it's also about like relying a lot on your intuition. Yeah.
Thank you, Don. Suli, would you like to add? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, to add on to that, I think both Danny and Dawn put it very well. It is a form of crossing over someone's boundaries, and there are a lot of different kinds of sexual misconduct, like verbal, visual, physical, and I think a lot of people see sexual harassment as, oh, someone touched me, and it's more than that. Sometimes it is making inappropriate comments about your body, your face, what you wear, um, catcalling, things like that, that makes you feel really uncomfortable just walking down the street. It can be like text messages, people asking for pictures, or even taking pictures of you without consent, um, and sending you pictures, asking for pictures, things like that. And there's also obviously the physical form of sexual harassment, touching, leaning over, or stalking someone.
Thank you. I think it's interesting because I guess all of the three of you brought up an interesting point, which is that the emphasis or the focus on the victim slash survivor or the person experiencing it, and how I think the thing to consider is how this individual feels when an act is done on them. So I think it kind of leads us very nicely to talk about consent. Consent is a buzzword, right? I think a lot of people have been talking about consent, and rightfully so. I'm glad that people are raising up conversations on consent. But maybe you guys can give me a brief breakdown of what is consent, and let's begin with that first.
Okay, I'm happy to start if you want. So for me, consent is a free, voluntary, and active yes to being a participant in sexual activity. It is an enthusiastic yes and nothing less.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that as well. At Go Talk, we firmly believe that consent is not the absence of no, but the presence of yes. And a lot of the time, it doesn't have to be the absence of consent. People think that just because I didn't say no meant that I consented to a certain situation, but that's not the case, because it's not consent if the situation was like partial, meaning the agreement was partial, like the person was either coerced into the situation, or it was forced, or it could have been withdrawn as well. So the person has every right to change their mind, even if you engage in a certain activity and you decided this wasn't for me. They have every right to withdraw their consent and say, please stop, I'm not comfortable with this. And I also like to point out how a lot of the times women they feel responsible for not giving explicit consent. And I also want to say that everyone's not responsible for the abusive actions of others, and no matter where you are, what you wore, what you drank, you are not responsible for that. Yeah.
I just wanted to, I guess, follow up with a question, because I like that you guys, Dawn particularly, you mentioned that if it's not a resounding yes, then it's a no, right? Does this extend to relationships as well? Because I think it's quite a hotly debated topic, right? Like, between partners, do you still have to give each other consent?
I think absolutely. Absolutely. You absolutely can say no to having sex with somebody that you are married to. Every individual has the right to put their boundaries in place and have those boundaries respected, which is why, thank goodness, after many years of campaigning, thank you very much, Aware, and many other people, as of 2020, there is no longer immunity for rape within the context of marriage. So that is the legislation making very clear that they do not condone pushing through a lack of consent in the context of a marriage.
Yeah, and I think consent is also based on this idea of respect, like just basic respect, and not expecting that you are entitled to any action or anything from anyone, and how, yeah, basically.
To add on to that, I think you could go beyond marriage, even in like a romantic relationship or any form of relationship. Just because you've done it before, or you had a relationship with someone and you break off, it doesn't imply that there's consensual, that you can do it again. Every single sexual act has to be consensual, which means an active yes.
Okay, we spoke quite a bit about specifically consent in the realm of like sexual activity, but I'm wondering how about instances of cases outside that. So I think one case that comes to mind quite recently is the incident where I think an athlete was harassed by her trainer for a couple of years. And I think these are things that we see quite regularly, right? Like instances of like, in the US, there's a very big case with the athlete and a bunch of athletes and the physician, and how, you know, he had sexually violated them for many years. So I'm wondering, in instances where I guess there is a clear like hierarchy or like a power dynamic where supposed consent has been given on the part of like the individual, how do we kind of navigate that? Because it becomes a bit more tricky and the lines are a bit more blur. So I think maybe like Danny can start off first, because I think you are a yoga instructor yourself, if I'm not wrong, right? So how do we kind of work around that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think specifically you're talking about the context of the USA gymnasts, which was a horrifying example. But even here, we see, particularly in the yoga space, we've had a few incidents where the yoga instructor touched somebody in a way that they did not deem appropriate, or, well, quite frankly, it was not appropriate. You never needed to touch people in that way, in that context. But I think the overarching point to note is that it is always, as a student, let's say it is in the example of a yoga class, it is always your decision whether you are touched at all. So really what should be happening in most classes is you should be asking. As a teacher, you should be asking permission. As a student, you should either be allowed to give consent or at least have space to refuse if you don't want to be touched at all, if you don't want adjustments. And I mean, my personal teaching philosophy and experiences of trauma, of course, have meant that my teaching style now has developed. It's very detailed verbal cues. I will use myself as the example of this is where you move your body. But if I do go in to adjust somebody, I will pause. I will say, are you okay with me placing my hand here? And if they say yes, then I will go ahead. If they don't, then I won't. And that's absolutely fine. And we need to give people the space to be able to refuse adjustments or touching. And that's in all contexts, not just yoga.
Just to add on to that, I think Danny gives a very good perspective in terms of coming from a teacher to a student, right? But I think for maybe Don and Suli can take this one. But if you're coming from the perspective of somebody who is maybe making a visit to a doctor's clinic, or having a relationship with somebody who is of a higher like hierarchy than you, and I think this kind of extends a bit into like workplace harassment. How would you kind of, I guess, remove yourself from those kinds of situation, or like to explicitly express consent or a lack of consent?
I think I start off with this one. Say if I'm in a doctor's visit and I start to get a bit uncomfortable, I'll start with probably non-verbal cues first, like shift away, use my body language, use eye contact to make myself look uncomfortable. And if the person still does not get the message, then I'll start to verbalize and say that, like, sorry, can you not do this? Or like, can I have some space, please? You're making me a little bit uncomfortable. So I would express my needs to the person.
I also want to add on to how whenever there is like a power difference and we are engaging with someone who is of a either higher social status, or maybe they are a professional or an academic, we tend to rely on their, we tend to trust them more, especially because of their credibility. But perhaps it is important not to second guess your emotions and your intuition when you're not feeling comfortable in a certain situation. So back when we had a panel by Girl Talk, we also had a panelist, one of the university students named Jerlyn. So she gave a little testimony on how she managed to respond to sexual harassment from a research assistant who kind of took advantage of the research situation and applied like heart monitors on her breasts, and he touched her inappropriately. And the whole situation made her second guess herself because she didn't know whether it was part of the research experiment. But she managed to document the whole thing on camera, and she was also able to write an email to herself after the incident and detail every single thing that went down. And she managed to get an investigation on the perpetrator and get him punished. So in that situation, you know, there's this great tendency to not trust your own emotions just because you're working with an expert on something else. But I think feelings are not to be undermined in such situations when it comes to establishing your boundaries.
Yep, I really like that example. Thank you for sharing, because I think that, and maybe I speak for the kind of younger generation when I say this. Okay, no, I don't think this is a younger generation thing. I think it's quite universal when I say that nobody kind of walks out of their house, they step out of their house expecting to face like harassment or, you know, abuse or, yeah, like any sort of violence. So I think the immediate reaction, if you find yourself in that position, would be either to, like Dawn mentioned, right, to second guess yourself and to say like, okay, maybe this is not happening, or he or she just made a mistake, right? So I really like that you gave the example, although it does also feel like, you know, the responsibility of response does fall on the shoulders of victims and survivors. I think that leads quite nicely to my second point on how does one, if they ever face sexual harassment / assault, how should they respond? Is there like a bunch of steps that we can take? Yeah, if we face violence.
I think just to set out this very clearly, I don't think there is any one right or wrong way for anybody to react to something that they do not believe is appropriate, that they did not consent to. We have, all of us, individually unique responses to a stressor. So some people may want to fight, some people may freeze, some people may want to run away, and some people may do everything that they can within their power to make that person who is doing that to them feel like it's okay. And I am one of those people. It's called the fawn response. It's one of the new fight, flight, freeze reactions to a stressor. And I think it's very important to realize that whatever we can say to you in the context of how should you respond, if you don't respond in any of those ways and you respond in a way that is completely unique to you, that's also completely fine. There is no right way to be a human being, and there is no right way to respond to sexual harassment or to respond to assault. But to saying that, there are a couple of things that you can try to do, or I mean, it kind of is a little bit ethereal as a concept, but try to remove yourself from that situation. Try to get away as fast as you can, I think is probably, if you have an injury, seek medical assistance. And if possible, if you are in the right headspace to do so, maybe try to obtain some degree of evidence, even if you don't bring this to the police or to any authorities, and it is entirely your prerogative whether you bring this to the authorities or not. It is your decision. But if it will help you at a later date, maybe inform someone or take a photograph or a screenshot of inappropriate comments, or save physical evidence if you have that. But apart from that, there is no right or wrong way to respond.
Can I also add on to how at times people, like survivors, will consider, especially if the situation occurs in between in an intimate setting or with someone whom you know personally, you will then consider what it means if you were to approach them or to report them, and you will think about how it will implicate them. And especially when dealing with such tenuous relationships, I think it's important to make your own perspective clear when you're articulating it to, let's say, a partner or a friend who may or may not have known that they took advantage of you. I think being able to have that emotional safety to say how you feel is really important. If the situation warrants it, if you are safe enough to do so. But if you don't feel safe, you can always vocalize your needs. I have done this a few times on public transport. Personally speaking, after evaluating the situation and seeing that it's possible to respond and I feel safe enough to say what I feel. Let's say someone is staring at me for an extended period of time, like making me feel like a piece of meat, or like making me feel really uncomfortable. I would just go up to them and say, like, don't look at me, like look at the traffic light, or don't, like, look at the traffic, don't look at me. And then I feel more empowered because the person will just like nod their head and turn away, because they know that I have a voice and they're not able to step on me like that. So yeah.
Sorry, just to add on to that, I understand how it feels like to be intimidated to talk to a stranger, because I am incredibly introverted myself. And some people might feel intimidated to just walk up to someone and say, "Hey, don't look at me that way." There are other things that can be done, like just approach a bystander, and if you can just say that, "I'm sorry, can you stand with me for a while?" And wait with me while my friend comes, till my friend comes, because this person is making me feel uncomfortable. Or if you can speak to an authority. I heard of this one story about this lady that was driving, and she saw someone in her rearview mirror, that someone was tailgating her and following her. So what she did was she drove to the police station instead, and the person stopped following her. So there's also a possibility to reach out to the authorities and reach out to someone else besides yourself, if there is an opportunity to do so.
Thank you all for sharing. I think, Don, I have to say you're very brave for approaching individuals like that, because I think, sad to say, I feel like many of us can relate to, being in an incident where you are either on a train or like walking along the street, and then you get an unwarranted like glance or like stare, and you don't really know what to do. You're like, should I look away? So I think I'm very much like Suli. I feel very shy and embarrassed. I'm like, okay, maybe what I should do is to kind of just walk away. But I do want to kind of just add on to the point also. I think that recognizing that you have recognizing who your support group is, I think that's very crucial and quite a big part of my own experience as well. I think every time, and I think this is boils back to having like a community, right? Like every time a close friend feels uncomfortable, they know that there's a group of girls or like friends that can be there for them. We are just one call away. We will come down if something occurs or makes them feel slightly uncomfortable. So I think, recognizing your support system is really quite an important part of this whole aspect. Before we carry on with the conversation, I do want to kind of put the spotlight on the two of you guys again, because I think we're going to move on to talking about why is it hard for survivors to talk about their experiences and conversations like these. But I do want to jump back on talking about you guys. So each of you have a very big part of, or you guys are very involved in talking about advocating for sexual assault and violence survivors and victims. So I do want to know what made you guys start on this journey of advocating for sexual harassment and assault. Feel free to start, anyone.
Okay, I can go first. I started Girl Talk as part of my FYP, my final year project back in university, and it actually all started because I was catcalled when I was on the way home from work, and I posted Insta story, like just trying to understand, like trying to negotiate. Why was I so scared to respond? And why do men even catcall at all? Like, what do they expect from the outcome? And a bunch of girls like replied me on my Insta story, and at that time I already had an FYP group, so I was thinking of pitching this as the topic. And we were really scared, honestly, because right now there might be a lot of like contention, especially when you post things online. We were afraid that people would not agree with our stance on how you are never responsible for someone else's abusive actions. But then we took a leap of faith, and we never looked back.
I can go next. I just have to say, Dawn, I really appreciate your work. I've been following Girl Talk for a while, and it's really inspiring. So thank you guys for doing what you do. As for myself, it was a very long, painful, and isolating journey in processing the trauma, and I just think that nobody should ever have to go through that. So I guess in a very raw sense, I wanted to do something about it. It's a way, I guess it's also a way for me to move forward from the assault and do something, however big, however small. And I feel that the more we talk about it, as we are right now, I think that there are more conversations about it, the more people are aware that things are really as bad as it is. And I think speaking as a survivor, talking about it makes it seem more real to other people, because even to myself sometimes I feel that these are news that you read about online or in the TV, and it doesn't feel real because it doesn't feel like it happens to people like you and me. But hearing it from a survivor, it makes it seem like it's more serious than it is, and hopefully people will take it more seriously. And I started So Let Us Talk because I know how difficult it is to access appropriate support from people, even people with the best intention, people within your support network. They can only support you in the ways that they know how to, and that might not necessarily be the support that a survivor needs. And sometimes in asking for it and not getting it, that whole process itself, it can be more traumatizing than the incident. So I know it was very isolating, and I want to provide the space for other survivors to feel less alone.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, me last. I think Suli and I probably have, I mean, of course, our experiences are not the same, but in this discussion about dealing with our own trauma and our own experiences was very isolating. For me, that was really probably the key word. After I experienced sexual harassment at work, my boss sexually harassed me. He continued to do so for a very long time. And I tried to speak out about it from the first day that it happened. I told someone who was essentially my supervisor, who said to me, she said, if you know what's good for you, you will not say anything. I then tried to speak to HR, and HR quit because they said she couldn't deal with something like this. It was too stressful for her, so she quit. I then spoke to more senior people in my law firm. They all told me that there was nothing that they could do. I then went to the founding partners of the law firm, and they sat me down and they said, there is nothing, quote unquote, there is nothing that this man can do that will make us discipline him. He is a foundation of this law firm, and as a result, there is nothing he could do to you that will make us believe you over him. And they told me that I was bullying him by trying to bring this forward. So after that, for about a year, I stopped talking about it. I did nothing. I internalized it. I became incredibly stressed and very, very, very anxious. I didn't really like being around people. I didn't really know what to do. I definitely didn't trust myself. And it was only really when the Me Too movement started to gain traction in the US and started to get really very publicized in about 2017 that I then thought, oh, okay, wait, other people are experiencing exactly the same thing that I went through, and they're being believed. And this is something that maybe I shouldn't have to go through this alone. So I went to therapy, because at that point that made me realize that actually something bad had happened. And I then began this journey in advocating for survivors. I met people at Aware. I started to speak about my experiences. I started working with people at Here to Change, which allows you to anonymously report and to discuss your get support from a community of people who have experienced sexual violence. And for me, at least, it became very cathartic to speak out, because initially people's reactions, my mother, my boyfriend at the time, all of people who I would have called my very, very good friends, said, why would you say anything about this? You know, you're going to ruin your career, you're going to ruin your reputation. What would people think? And I started to realize after quite a while that I didn't care. I didn't care what people thought, because if somebody had said to me, I believe you, I think this is incredibly important and we need to deal with this together, at the time, then I would not have had the experiences and the stress that I have had now. I would have been able to process it very, very differently. So, and in Singapore, 40% of people say they have been harassed in the workplace. And how many people do you actually know who are happy to speak to anyone about that? 40%. So this is why I do what I do, and this is why I started to talk about my own experiences, to normalize this and to make coming forward with these incidences and these experiences less alien to people.
Thank you guys for sharing. That was, I'm very thankful that you guys are able to share such a difficult experience with everybody on the panel. And I think, Danny, when you said that, only when the Me Too movement became big in the US, that empowered you to kind of speak about your own experience. I think similarly, I hope that, this panel, people tuning in, if you need help, you recognize that I think everybody on this panel has a space or is a safe space for you to come and approach for anything. If you want to ask a question, please feel free to drop us a question or reach any of us on Instagram. I think we are there. I do want to kind of go back onto the point. I think all of you shared some quite interesting points in terms of like how you felt when you went through your experience. I got isolating from Suli. I think you mentioned that quite a bit. There was a bit of trauma as well as a couple of barriers in terms of reporting, the processes of reporting in the workplace. I do think all of you kind of take on a separate perspective. So I think that, Danny provides like a workplace harassment kind of perspective. Dawn represents kind of more of a school-based violence and harassment, and then Suli more general societal kind of instances. I do want to ask you guys to kind of break it down for me. Why is it, sometimes hard for survivors or victims to talk about their sexual experiences? And I guess what are the barriers that they might face in terms of like making proper reports?
I can step in for this first. Wow, there's just so much. I don't know where to begin. I think fundamentally from the survivor's internal journey, there's just so much to deal with. You're basically surrounded with self-blame, guilt, shame. You have to deal with flashbacks, triggers, and basically everything that you come to know of the world can be shaken up. Your sense of identity, your sense of trust, your sense of safety, your sense of control, because this is the thing about trauma, is that it is something that is life altering, you see. So it can affect everything that you come to know of the world. And small decisions can become big decisions, like should I take the train, should I take the bus, should I take a Grab? Things with about control, about body image. Can I eat this? How do I feel about myself? All these things, all these littlest things, it affects you, and every day can be a struggle. And these are things that take time to process, and sometimes some survivors, they don't have the capacity to deal with beyond that, to think about reporting, because there's really so much to deal with, and it can take time, like months, years, to rebuild their sense of the world. And the thing about reporting is that it makes it so real, and maybe living in denial, not believing that it's true, or wanting to forget it is the only way to get through the everyday struggles. So maybe survivors are not just quite ready yet to think about reporting. And it is, the whole thing about reporting is also it's a huge step in itself. And if they ever get to the point where they can think about reporting, there's also a lot of confusion, a lot of self-doubt. Did it really happen? Is it considered a rape? Am I just making a big deal out of nothing? So yeah, I think that there are a lot of aspects to why people don't report.
Thank you, Suli. I think you summed up the experiences of like victims and survivors quite well. I'm wondering for maybe Don or Danny, in the perspective of like universities and the police maybe, or like even workplaces, what are kind of the barriers in individuals coming forward with their own stories?
I think for university experiences, particularly, the relationships on campus tend to be very difficult to navigate, especially if you're a freshman and you are trying to make all these new connections and deep relationships with people. And if people happen to take advantage of that, it can be very traumatizing and pressurizing, especially because you don't want to speak out and make things awkward, especially when you're in a group. So the need to preserve group harmony becomes another factor to take into consideration, alongside how your own personal relationship with the perpetrator, and if you are ready to make it awkward or break that connection with them by approaching the topic. So in addition to all the trauma responses that you have to deal with, the fight, flight, and freeze, you also have to deal with all these relationship issues. And at times people don't really know how to navigate that. But we at Go Talk, we always advise them to put themselves first, and do what they think is the most healthy thing for them.
And I think more from the workplace perspective, I think a lot of people are concerned that reporting may have an effect on their career. And this is definitely something that I experienced. I mean, I was told repeatedly that I'd made a bad name for myself by trying to bring my perpetrator to justice. And in fact, I'm still in the middle of a legal battle to try to bring him to justice. And he is readily and repeatedly smearing my name all the way across these legal proceedings. He is still working in the same company that was made very aware of everything that he did. He was promoted the week after I came forward formally with my complaints. So this system, and more to the point, workplaces are really are not always easy on survivors, and this needs to change. But I think the more that people talk about this and the more that we normalize this, the more that companies will realize that this really is a problem that needs to change. Their attitudes to it need to change. They can't just appoint one HR person who can't cope with it. They need to do more, and they need to be better as companies. And I realize that's not a person per se, but it's a legal entity. They need to do more. That can involve the creation of policies within the workplace. In my experience, my personal experience, those policies meant absolutely nothing unless you have people who are willing to put them into practice. But having said that, there are workplaces that are incredibly supportive, and it really depends on each individual case, of course. But there are very serious aspects to consider for people like myself will have considered when coming forward about their sexual harassment or their assault experiences.
I think that leads nicely to my next question. I was going to ask about what you guys thought about the policies that are currently in place. I think not only on a governmental level, but even in like campuses, and I would say even like, you know, gyms or like sports centers, different workplaces, right? Do you think in your own experience that the current existing policies are adequate in addressing sexual harassment, or what kind of changes, if you do want to see change, what kind of changes would you like to see in these structures and institutions? Maybe you could go with Dawn first.
Okay, so currently for campus situations, the protocol would be to inform the school, and the school will make the police report on your behalf. Initially, when the Monica Bay incident happened, a lot of people were dissatisfied with how NUS managed things. But during the Go Talk panel, I think we were reminded by our lawyers on the panel that students are in a rather privileged position in the sense that the school will be there to handle the police report with them. As opposed to managing the case as an individual, it will be more difficult to gather evidence and to go to the police station by yourself. In that case, the school is able to kind of step in and make sure that you are first, like primarily, you are safe before they try to remove the perpetrator from the situation. Whether they are in the same classroom as you, or you know, whether you're in the same hall, they will remove them from the situation and then they will make the police report. As to whether that procedure is adequate, I think that one of the things holding it back from being the most ideal is our perceptions towards it, because currently we are, you know, having a lot of distrust with the school, and I think that if we were to work closely with them in order to manage the case, if the survivors can trust the school counselors and the school admin to help them settle things, then overall, I think that the procedures will be more, will move more smoothly.
If perhaps I can share about policies and procedures. I mean, I already mentioned that in my own context, in the workplace at least, it was a pretty difficult time for me to try and use those policies. You know, I'm a lawyer. I love the black letter of the law. I love looking at a piece of paper and it explaining to me, this is the consequence of what you have experienced. And I have to admit, it was a bit difficult, very difficult for me to really realize that actually what was written down was not the case, and it was entirely subject to whatever the whims of the people who wanted to put these policies into place were at the time. But again, I think it's quite difficult for me to talk in general terms about workplaces specifically, but perhaps if I just were to touch on perhaps policing and procedures there, because I also separately have various different experiences with trying to report incidences to the police. I think to some extent agree with what Dawn is saying. And I mean, of course, let's assume that the school is sort of looking after you and looking after your well-being, but also that they are taking you seriously. This is the ideal world, that the school will take you seriously and will not simply allow a perpetrator back into the classroom, as we have also seen that in some incidences. But when you don't have that additional step, when you don't have those authorities, and you are dealing directly with the police and with the criminal justice system, this is not just limited to Singapore, but my experience that I'm discussing will refer to Singapore, which it's really not an easy process. It's really very difficult. You will be asked a lot of the time to repeat your experience multiple times. I think when very short context, my house was broken into and I was attacked in the middle of the night a couple of years ago. And I was asked to give my statement at 3 o'clock in the morning whilst in floods of tears and absolutely terrified. I was then asked to come back in and give another statement. I was then asked to come back in and give another statement. I was not informed of what was happening at any time. I was told by the police officer more than once that the guy could have been released. We're not sure if he's been granted bail or not. This is in the context of somebody who the police had told me had been stalking me. I had no idea until I woke up and he was kneeling next to my face when I was sleeping. And my experience with the authorities was really not great. I actually don't know if he's still in jail or not. I have absolutely no idea. I appointed a lawyer to act for me, to sort of be a third party in those proceedings so that I would have to legally be updated. I still haven't been updated. I don't know what happened. The court has not told me, the legal system has not told me what's happened. Don't know if he's walking around still. So there need to be improved reporting processes. Survivors need to be central in these processes because it is a very difficult and a very traumatizing process. So I think survivor-centric models of addressing sexual harassment are key here.
I'll just add on to that. Thank you, Danny, for sharing that. And I have similar experiences in reporting my assault. I do have to say that as an individual, there are channels that you can go to. I went with Aware, and I was really fortunate that my case manager, she walked me through the process before, and she broke it down to me. And ultimately, there is no right or wrong in making a report or not. It's only the survivor's choice, and I was constantly reminded of that. I'm very thankful of it. And I was brought to the Cantonment police station, which I believe is I might not be right, I'm not sure, because I'm really not an expert in all these, but I believe is the HQ that manages the sexual assault cases. And the policeman, the IO investigating officer, they were all very informed, very trauma informed. So I think the whole process to me was, I won't say a pleasant one, but it was not as bad as I would have imagined. But the thing is, I can understand that this whole education behind the process that goes with reporting a case is not readily accessible to the public. If I had not reached out to Aware, I wouldn't have known that this is what to be expected. And I think a lot of people, jumping back to the earlier question, and one of the reasons why people don't make reports is because they are intimidated by the process. They're not informed, and I think that this can be a part of our general education. People can be more educated about what's the process, and not just the processes, but what it involves as well. Because when you're making a report, it's a huge step, and you're basically putting yourself, like what Danny said, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable situation to have to recount the trauma, the incidents over and over again, and it can be very triggering for survivors. But I don't think people are aware of that, the emotional baggages it comes with it. So I remember this was one of my I think this was quite fresh from the assault, and I told the guy that I was seeing at that point of time that this happened to me, and he was obviously very angry for me. But the next time that we met, for a date, I didn't know what was going to happen, but he was going to bring me to the police station, and I was mad like hell. I was like, "Who are you to decide for me whether or not I should report?" And the thing is, I think people are not informed about what it takes to make a report. That when you're faced with such uncomfortable news, I think people's response is just to want to be useful and do something good about it, something noble about it, to make it seem that they care. But the person that you really should care about is the survivor's well-being. And as for the processes, I think what Danny said about how it should be more transparent. I'm still waiting to hear about my results. I don't know what's going on, and I think it should be more transparent. People should be more educated about the processes behind and what it takes to step up and come forward to make a report.
Well, can I also add on that after what Danny said about having a survivor-centric model and what Suli mentioned about being trauma-informed, I think that is really important when, especially at the police station, the police are well-informed and well-equipped to deal with such trauma cases, especially because my placement with Project X, we're informed of cases where trans women have reported incidents to the police and the police didn't want to do anything because they weren't considered like real women. So I think for the people who are directly interacting with survivors, it's very important for them to be trauma-informed and survivor-centric as well.
Thank you all for sharing. I want to touch quickly on a few points before I think we move on to our Q&A. Thank you guys for sharing your experiences and stories. I do really agree that a victim/survivor-centric approach is really the way to move forward. I think speaking with victims and survivors also, I do think that that's really, really important. I just want to let everybody in the audience know if you guys are tuning in, we'll be moving on to our Q&A soon. So if you guys have any questions for any of the panelists, please drop them there. I've seen a couple of comments directed to Suli and Dawn and Danny. Basically sharing that you guys are very brave and very inspiring. You guys really, really are. So if you want to keep asking questions, please go ahead. We'll take them later. I do want to touch on the point of the fact that I guess now where we are today, we do see a lot of cases of sexual harassment and assault being reported. More and more victims/survivors are coming forward to voice out stuff that they've gone through. I want to know what you guys think caused this progress. Do you think that platforms like social media have helped to amplify these issues to show that, show and highlight that sexual misconduct is wrong? I think Suli, you can take this question first since, you have a platform as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably since the Me Too movement, there had been a lot more conversations surrounding this topic, and I think the news has also been doing their part in highlighting sexual misconduct. And I've seen a lot of social media channels, Instagram pages that are set out to educate people about the effects of trauma, what can you do, how to respond. So I think, people are more open to talk about it. People are more willing to listen. And the fact that there are people coming forward, it normalizes speaking out.
I agree. I think that the advent of social media definitely allows for more people to see when other people are talking, and perhaps in some instances, and I think we've seen some amazing people in Singapore really speaking out about this, but also sharing their journey and sharing whether or not they go through things with the authorities or not, and sharing their thought processes. I mean, I've seen a few amazing ones over the last couple of days where people are just so raw and open with how they are feeling and how this has made them feel. And I think that normalizes the fact that we have experienced this trauma, and also reduces shame. And shame is something that is so pervasive in our society, and I'm sure everyone watching will know in their heads an example of where they have experienced that, or any kind of shame themselves. And I think especially as survivors, we experience a lot of internal shame, as well as any shame that is put on us externally from people who may not even know that is how they're reacting. But then when you see people talking about this, bringing this forward, it gives strength. It really gives strength to a lot of people.
I
Don't
think you guys put it very well. I don't really have much to add on.
No, thank you. I wanted to add on something. I do think that sharing my own experiences, I do definitely think that we cannot underestimate the power of like a movement, because I think similar to Danny, when I first learned about the Me Too movement, it really helped me to kind of process, I guess, my own experiences, some of the things and experiences that I had like buried, and kind of like chucked aside for a long period of time because of like exactly what you guys were sharing about, right? Shame, like fear and stuff like that. So just tying in back to the point of that, I guess all of you are providing a platform and space to talk about, to educate our society on the importance of like speaking out, being a good ally, what is considered consent, things like that. I think really helps the next few generations of people who have gone through experiences but kind of chuck them aside to kind of process whatever they have gone through as well. So amazing platforms. All of you tuning in should really go and check it out and share with your friends. I think that the more people who are aware of this, the better our society will be. So I think really moving on to our more or less like final question for today's conversation. I think the first bit is if you guys could share a bit about what are the various resources available for help if a person has been harassed or abused. And then adding on to that, how do we, as bystanders, become an ally to victims/survivors? So a two-part question. I think you guys can pick which one you'd like to take on.
So for the aspect of the university campus situations, the resources available for the respective universities are actually all well documented on the Girl Talk website and the Girl Talk Instagram. So I think it has been compiled in a very concise way, and you can write directly to them, or you can call the campus hotlines. As for what we can do as allies, I think we were most empowered when we went for the Aware Sexual Assault First Responder training as a group, and we realized that Aware took such a strong stance, such a firm stance on their perspective of like what harassment is and how we are like never responsible for it as survivors. And that really empowered us, because that really stopped all questions of whose responsibility is it, and to what extent did we play a part in creating like misguided expectations. But no, they were very, very firm about it, and I strongly recommend the course for anyone who's interested, whether you want to be like a supportive friend if you know any survivor, or whether you want to equip yourself for any potential situation and how to respond, and just knowing first what your boundaries are before responding.
I can go next. I'll touch on how we can better support survivors first. I think most of the time when a survivor speaks out, most of the time we're looking for support. So definitely active listening, and with a genuine intention of wanting to understand, and not trying to change how they feel, like or try to find the silver lining, and just sit with them and sit with their pain. I think that's helpful for them to process their trauma. I think as survivors, we also want to have the space to talk about it over and over and over and over again, and not to feel bad about wanting that space. So if that's it, if you have the capacity to provide that space, please do. We also have for me, I run So Let Us Talk, and it is a safe space for women to come together and draw support from one another. And as mentioned before, I know how difficult it is to receive the appropriate support that one needs. So in this space, we encourage women to come together and support one another, because there are people who actually get what you're going through and know how to respond appropriately. So how it works is that we have a theme that we run for every session, and we use creative arts intervention like writing, arts and craft, and music to navigate these difficult themes. And that's also because we believe that creative arts is amazing. It helps to express emotions and experiences that words are sometimes unable to. And survivors often struggle to find words to express how they feel or their experiences. So yeah, creative arts is something very helpful in that, in breaking down these difficult topics.
So yes, there are a few different avenues that people can explore when they want to consider whether or not they want to report. Going to the police is an obvious resource that you can do, but as discussed, there are lots and lots of different other options that you could recommend to people who come to you potentially to say, look, something has happened to me, or indeed if something does happen to you as a survivor. So the Aware Sexual Assault Care Centre is an incredible resource. They have a helpline. You can email them for workplace-based issues. They have a workplace harassment and discrimination advisory. I hope I have that the right way around, where you can call them. It's a helpline, and you can email them. Aware have the incredible first responder training. I would highly recommend this to everyone, absolutely everyone, even if you are a survivor and you think, oh, I know how I will respond when somebody reports something to me. It really is just very eye-opening and a very important way to really explore your own understanding of consent and to explore your own understanding of sexual harassment or sexual violence. And of course, there are also many different types of counselling opportunities in Singapore. As somebody who is a very vocal advocate for going to therapy, I think that it's a really great resource. If you can find a therapist who is trauma informed, that is something that you should be asking people, the therapist, before you go to the sessions. You should say, hi, can I just check with you, are you trauma informed? Are you trained to be able to sensitively respond to these sort of issues? You don't have to explain to them what has happened to you at that point before you see them, but it just brings a little bit of peace and kind of in the back of your mind. So those are in terms of resources and looking at how people can think about becoming an ally without really just repeating the first responder training that I think both a few of us, if not all of us, have been to. Really the most important thing is to listen to what the person in front of you is telling you. And that doesn't necessarily mean just listen to what they are saying. It means really understand with this person who is in front of you, can you really get to grips with emotionally how they are doing? How can you best serve them in your capacity as friend, as sibling, as family member, as colleague? Because you really never know when you might be able to change somebody's life and to really help somebody when they're in a time that they really need that help and they really need that understanding. To try not to pass judgment, and to try not to pass judgment in forms of questions even. So not to say things like, oh, but where were you? What were you doing? Why were you walking home so late? What were you wearing? Why did you do that? Why do you feel like that? It's just to, instead of asking these questions that really kind of only serve yourself and your curiosity, it might just be better to take a step back and just to think, how can I help this person? And how can I make this person a priority in this moment? This person is going through something very difficult. So yeah, I think that's probably in summary what I wanted to say.
Sorry, can I just add on to that? That I think that when people hear these kinds of news, and they want to help, right, with the best intention, but sometimes not really knowing how to, or wanting to change how the person feels, because you're not supposed to feel this way. I want to change that. And what Danny say about the most important thing is just to listen. I think that's really, really, really important. Like, I think as a survivor, the most of the time what we're seeking out for is to be able to say that, hey, this sucks, this hurts, and it's okay if you don't understand, because I don't expect you to understand, and I don't want you to understand or go through anything of that sort, but I just want you to know that it hurts, and to not having to justify or defend why am I feeling this way. And I want to have the space to just say that it hurts, and I want you to acknowledge that it is as bad as it is, and just sit there with me, and um not probe, don't ask, don't ask more than what they're ready to tell you. Don't give them any silver linings, because then you're kind of just downplaying their pain, right? Like, you're not, well, it's not that bad, right? At least you have this. But then if it's not that bad, then I wouldn't feel this way. That's what they would think. So yeah, the most important thing is just to listen with a genuine intention of wanting to understand what they're going through.
Yeah, can I just add on how if a survivor approaches you and wants to share their story, the chances are every question that you want to ask them, they've already thought about it, you know. They've already considered, like, was it my fault? Was it what I was wearing, or where I was drinking? Did I ask for it? All these questions already went through their mind. And I think personally, when I used to get very affected by being like harassed on the street, I remember there was one particular incident. I was really frazzled, and I told my boyfriend about the whole thing, and I just started telling him about what I was wearing that day, and he just cut me off and said it doesn't matter what you were wearing at all. And that really hit me, because there was already so much internalized self-blame and shame and guilt for something that wasn't my responsibility.
Cool. Thank you guys for sharing. I think we have a bit of time left for this particular session. I do want to move on to the Q&A aspect of it. So yeah, I think the guys at Lokalfeed will be spotlighting some of the questions that you guys have asked, but keep your questions coming. Okay, cool. We have a first question, so I'm just going to read it out. I think we can keep it quite open. If you guys want to take it, go ahead. So the question is, should transparency and information on sexual misconduct be shared in our school levels or included in sex education, especially on the topic of what consent means?
I think the short answer to this is absolutely yes. I think that, in fact, this is something that needs to be added to sex education, a concept of consent, to understand what it is to say yes. I think a lot of the time, when we experience sex education in schools, it is very, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, wait till you're married, don't do it, just don't do it. And that is all very well and good, but then where does the enjoyment come in? Where does the enthusiastic yes come in? Where are you taught that actually this can be a really lovely experience? But then also understanding the flip side of that, which is when I do not give that enthusiastic yes, how do I not give that enthusiastic yes in these complicated relational circumstances? You know, if I'm feeling a bit concerned about this, if I kind of want to take a step back, how do I convey that to my partner in the moment? And I'm not saying anyone should feel guilt, but why am I feeling guilty about saying no? Why am I maybe feeling that I should just do this because clearly the person I'm doing this with wants me to? And so again, this concept of the enthusiastic yes, because you know that you want to do this, and then also that understanding of how to say no and when you can say no, which is whenever you want. So public education, educational institutions within the context of the workplace, but from the police, from the media, everything. The more we can talk about consent, the more we can share about it, the better.
I do want to add on to, I think, Danny's point in that I think I 100% agree. I think that it has to be talked about. I do also think that it's very difficult. And I say this as somebody who works with like sex therapists. I speak to a couple of like educators as well. I have friends in the education system. And I think there's a bit of a difficulty, right, coming from a society that is kind of crossing or like standing on the boundaries of between being liberal but also like conservative, upholding certain like value systems and stuff like that. So I do think that it is necessary, but it's interesting to me, I think, to see how we are going to kind of navigate that in the future. How grown-up initiatives like So That Let's Talk, Girl Talk, are going to kind of fill the very much needed gap, and also how that's going to impact when people do get educated, how that's going to impact the want for a more like robust, holistic kind of sex education in general. So, yeah. Okay, cool. We're moving on to our next question. So the question is, trauma-informed plus survivor-centric models are the way forward, which is something that we discussed earlier in the session. Hopefully, first responders like counseling centers and police stations can receive training from AWARE. How can we move this forward?
I think this is something for the authorities to definitely be informed about. I mean, they need to be aware that this is an issue in order for them to move this forward. And I think AWARE are doing a fantastic job in raising this. And also, not only in my context, I know that they have done a lot to educate lawyers as well, what has happened within the context of the court system and how to treat survivors, and running workshops for lawyers for this specifically. But moving things into counseling centers and police stations, the more I think the public starts to talk about this and to raise this to government level and to government visibility, the more likely this is to be pushed forward. Definitely.
I like that you touch about that, because I think I was going to ask Suli and Don what are their opinions on this, especially from individuals who have done a more like ground up initiative.
I think Danny is right to say that AWARE has been working with the police to have to be more trauma informed, and so the way that they handle the interviews is smoother and less traumatizing for survivors. That's what I've been told, at least when I went there for my report, and it shows, I think, because when I went there, it was not. It didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt more like an interview. I wouldn't say like it's a spa, but it was handled really well. That said, I do think that the more we talk about it, the more there's an awareness that's built on this, and well, it's really up to the authorities. I can't say that, hey, I want this to happen and it's gonna happen, but I wish I can. Yeah, but the more we talk about it, hopefully we can change individuals' minds, and that will just build.
Yeah, I think Girl Talk was started with this whole idea of wanting to generate more conversations between people, conversations that are authentic and that believe the survivors. Apart from that, how we can move it forward is to support these ground up initiatives by participating in whatever events that they create. Support by, even if you're not able to attend the event, you can just share it, or you can like post about it on social media. And everyone has a very powerful voice when it comes to being involved. You don't have to support from just like one tangible aspect.
Okay, so we have another question. The question is, what should one do when an act of harassment is done? For instance, somebody took a video of you secretly and they were found out, but it was swept under the carpet because of shame internally or externally. So I think this is something that we kind of touched on earlier today, or especially if it's family, how does one deal with it? Very good question, I think. Anyone can feel free to take the question.
I think first of all, it depends on the relationship between the survivor and the perpetrator, and how positive or negative that relationship is. And if there is a non-existent relationship, then I wouldn't recommend like trying to talk to them and trying to understand their perspective or letting them feel about it. But instead, then you can collect the evidence that that they took a video, if there was any CCTV involved, or if they posted it, can you screenshot that? Can you save their username? Just collect all the evidence that is possible, and then maybe Danny can walk us through the process of sending the video into the police as evidence and everything.
I would actually, let me just see if I can find the rest of this question so that I can just double check that I'm answering this right, because it sounds like this is a specific event and a specific experience. And I think we, as from Three Lines, aren't really able to know what happened, or what it means that they were found out, or what it means that it was swept under the carpet, and what internal or external shame this one individual or hypothetical person may be experiencing. So it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think the first thing that we should note is that there is no one right or wrong way, as we've been talking about through the whole of this. There is no one right or wrong way to respond. How does this individual, for example, want to act? What do they feel in themselves will make them feel more peace about this situation? And it doesn't need necessarily to be brought to the police. We've talked about lots and lots of different options. And doing something like going to the sexual assault care centre would be a very good option. You can speak to somebody anonymously, you can call their helpline anonymously, and they can give you more specific assistance if this is a real circumstance. And especially with family as well, it's very, very difficult for any of us to make any recommendations. I think especially if it's someone's real life. I don't want to make any suggestions on what you should or shouldn't do off the basis of Three Lines, but I think make sure that you, as a survivor, sit with yourself and work out what it is that will make you feel the most empowered. Is there a way that you can empower yourself from within to take whichever action that you feel will work for you in this moment?
Sorry, I just want to go back to the previous question and check if like Suli or Don has anything else to add, because I think I wanted to also add that like the reality is that it is difficult, because I think the second part of the question was that especially if it's family, how does one deal with it? The reality it is that it is often that I think the victim/survivor might know the perpetrator personally, so that makes things a bit challenging. But I think like what Danny said, like it really depends on you and what is the best course of action for you. So I just wanted to add that like it's a complicated situation, but checking in with yourself, that's really, really important. So yeah, is there anything from like Suli and Don? Is there anything you guys might want to add to this?
I'll just say that it is, like you say, it is very complicated. It is a very tricky situation, especially when it's a family member that you may be living with. And Danny is right to say that there is really no right or wrong in this, and it's even harder for us to give suggestions based on Three Lines, or even if we know the full story. I think it's completely up to the survivor's choice on what is comfortable for you, what is something that's going to make you feel better about this. I just really hope that this individual is receiving the support he or she needs. This person is able to find someplace safe, like I don't know, lock your rooms, or I don't know the situation, but something safer than the current situation.
I think also some questions to help your decision is to think about if it's family and if there are younger siblings around or younger cousins around that might potentially be exposed to the same experience as you, and if that responsibility kind of, if you feel like that responsibility to protect them also falls on your shoulders, it's just something for you to consider. Another question is, if it were to happen again, how can you prevent it? And are you prepared to respond if it happens again? Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I think just to the person who asked the question, if you do need any help, I would say that anybody on this panel is quite willing to assist you or like to provide you with any help you need. So do reach out to them in your own time and space. I think the details are on the Lokalfeed's YouTube channel as well as like the social media platform. So yeah, I think we're going to round off with one last question for this particular session. So yeah, we have a question. It says, it's strange that victims are blamed for a crime committed against them and made to suffer by society. What do you all think needs to be changed for victims to be treated as victims?
I'll just start off with this one. First things first, I personally relate to the term survivor itself. So I would rather be treated as a survivor than a victim. But I know there are people who respond differently, and some people resonate with victims more. I just feel that what needs to be changed? Well, first things first, I think this whole victim blaming culture that it has to change. I think why people do this in the very first place is that when you hear uncomfortable news like that, people just want to find a reason to believe that their world is safe, that it is not as bad as it is. So maybe that's why people try to point out what they would have done differently if they were in the survivor's position, and that just indirectly or directly makes the survivor feel like, oh, maybe there's something that I could have done differently. And I think this whole mindset has to be shifted, because nobody would ask for this, and which is why we need to talk more about it. We need to educate the people around us, even if it's a friend. If you hear someone commenting on someone else's clothes or making inappropriate comments, call them out, because it's not right. Because it's all of these that indirectly shapes the way that people think about this is why it happened, because of what she wore or because she was drunk, things like that. So I think from an individual stand, you can make a difference in that.
Yeah, and I think that everyone can afford to be more empathetic when dealing with survivors. One good way is to just treat them as if they were your family member. What if that situation happened to them, to a loved one? You wouldn't second guess it, and you would back them up, and you would support them in every way that you can.
I think from my own perspective, I think if you're looking at this on a societal level and you're looking at how things are brought to court, which is essentially the public version of how society reacts, right? There are two different sides, and the two different sides are fighting. The survivor is fighting for their position, and the perpetrator is fighting for his position. And that actually can lead to a lot of issues as a survivor, because you really feel like, this has happened to me. Why do I need to fight? Why do I need to stand up and say, this is not right, because everyone knows this is not right. Nobody wants this to happen. And this has already been put in law that this is not legal. So why do I have to go through all these processes of whether it's legal or whether going through your company and going through HR and having to push your position and really all of this stuff that we're being pushed to do? I think all systems, no matter what, whether it's doesn't have to be a system. It can also be family. It can also be friends. It can also be within your own little bubble of society. Everyone can afford to be more trauma informed. I completely agree with Dawn. The more empathy that we have, the better. I think that the more options for support systems that we can have, the better. The more informed that everyone is. So even the more informed the police are, the more informed that the law system is, the more informed that everyone, even therapists, let's make all therapists trauma informed. Look at the statistics on everything that is happening here even. Never mind the 97% of women in the UK who have said that they've been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. So I think we very clearly on a societal and an individual level need to realize that this is a real problem for basically the next person sitting next to us on the MRT. And by doing that and talking about it and normalizing the fact that this has happened to all of us, we can then create systems that mean we do not have to be victims anymore and we really can be survivors.
So I think that really nicely sums up our session for today. So I just want to really just run up the session by thanking all of you joining us today, tuning into this live stream, as well as the three panelists. I think that we had quite a robust and interesting conversation, and it's nice for us to end off on the note that, hopefully moving forward, I think we will adopt a more like victim/survivor-centric model in dealing with cases of like sexual harassment and assault. So thank you guys for joining us today. If you guys tuning in have any questions for any of the panelists, myself included, I think you can find our social media handles on Lokalfeed's Instagram page and YouTube channel. We're all available. Feel free to reach out with any questions, help, and maybe even ideas you have on how to make our society a bit better. I think we'll be very glad to collaborate. So thank you guys.